The internet is a strange place, and the corner of the internet that I inhabit with these videos is particularly peculiar. In my videos, I often come across people who are very interested in traditional Christianity, and that's great. And I am interested in it as well, and I've learned a lot from it. And I make these videos because I find it interesting, and you probably watch them because you find them interesting, and I'm glad. But I think it's maybe time for us to address the fact that this corner of the internet can lead people down really strange rabbit holes that we should probably be talking about. Now, normally in my videos, they take the form more of a video essay in which it's scripted and a bit more philosophical. But today, I'm going to try to speak about the internet in the internet's language, and that is primarily that of memes. So, today I want to talk about the Iceberg of Traditional Christianity. This is just I didn't make the format, but the layers of this is something I set up and I think will be familiar to a lot of you. So for a lot of people, the journey of looking into traditional Christianity, and by this I mean forms of Christianity that have long histories and go back for quite some time, that have been around and have formed traditions. So this often starts, I'm going to take a Protestant perspective on this, with maybe reading Calvin and Luther. That's where it started for me during my theology degree. You begin going into the Reformation sources and say, wow, this has a lot more depth than my kind of evangelical upbringing. This is cool. But then that leads you to the next thing. You go, wait, Christianity started before the Reformation. What do we do with this? Then you find these people called the Church Fathers. Now, this is a big step. Maybe you start with someone like Athanasius and his book On the Incarnation, because, after all, it's recommended by C.S. Lewis, and he's pretty much the Protestant Pope, so that's a safe place to start. But then you realize, wait, the popular patristic series, there's so many of them, let me read them all. You don't read them all, but you read a couple of them and you decide the Church Fathers are pretty cool. That leads you then below the surface. And so you've read some of the Protestant sources, you've gotten into the Church Fathers, you realize the church has been around for a long time, but that leads you to realize that the church is a bit different than your own. And unfortunately, this takes the term when everyone begins to say everything I ever grew up with was wrong. Now, not everyone does this, of course, but one of the things that often happens is that as people begin to be exposed to beauty outside of their tradition or outside of the sources that the church they grew up in pulled from, they begin to see that everything in their tradition is wrong. And now, this often happens, right? And it happens on a small scale when we grow up and we have that phase where we say that our parents were wrong about everything. This happened with my dad and I in politics. Everything he thought had to be wrong because, well, he had to be wrong because now I was turning into an adult and I had to define myself as not him, right? And then maybe you come around. Maybe you've had a similar experience. I think it often happens with church as well. It was a running joke in Bible college that the most dangerous thing is like a second semester Bible college student because he thinks he knows everything and then they go home over Christmas break and they inform their pastor that they're wrong about everything. Something similar happens when we investigate church history. We begin to say that, the church we grew up in is just cringe. Maybe it is, maybe it's not, but that's how we begin to feel. So this stage, especially if you come from like a lower church background, people begin to think, ugh, this is bad. And so you look for something else. And this generally comes in the form of liturgy. Now, what happened for me, and maybe what happened for you, is you go to something like a Latin Mass. You go, wow, this is amazing. Like, this is so different. It's in a different language, and it's so deep. Oh, my goodness. This is awesome. But then you go further down the rabbit hole, and you find the divine liturgy of the Eastern Orthodox Church. And you say, like those emissaries sent from Russia, I don't know if I'm in heaven or on earth, that this is the best thing you've ever experienced. And I'm using a bit, facetious language here, but those things really are beautiful. And you begin to say, whoa, this is different. This is so different. I need something like this. And maybe you go on a different ramp here and you go towards a Protestant liturgy, which I do think is worth saying. Like a lot of the mainline churches have really beautiful liturgies that we just write off because we've been taught that the mainlines are bad, which might not be entirely accurate. But in any case, this often then comes to a real crux. We're getting far down the iceberg at this point. And that is the East-West decision. And what this means is we've got two groups at this point claiming to be the one true church. You've got the Eastern Orthodox and the Roman Catholics. And historically, they have claimed that they are the one true church. And they've coupled this with the saying albeit diversely understood that outside the church there is no salvation, and so you've got to decide. And they both have really good arguments, and people get stuck here for a lot of time, and it can be really difficult, right? But what often happens is that once someone makes this decision, they become really, once again, defining themselves by what they're not. So just like you went from church fathers are cool, so my non-denom is cringe, you go from East is right, so West is heretic, or West is right, so East is heretic. And you have all of these volumes to pull on, right? About how the other side's wrong and how something like the filioque way leads to abortion, or that, the East is really just like not even right. And so you get the point, right? It gets deep and weird at times here when you begin to say that everyone else is a heretic. And that leads you to a fun next level where not just like the other half of Christendom is heretical, but actually like 99% of people, including our hierarchs, are heretics. You see this once you get to like sedevacantists in the West, or you have just some really stringent and rigorous people in the East who look at people like the Ecumenical Patriarch, or even just most of the metropolitans, and say, yeah, they're all heretics. They've all got it wrong because I've read everything and I know, and my prophet on YouTube tells me that they're all wrong. And so, wow, we are deep down the rabbit hole now. We went from Luther and the church fathers being cool to everyone, including the leaders of the organizations we're in, being heretics. But hey, I mean, we're just watching the videos and reading the books, and we're just coming to the logical conclusions. And then we get to really weird places. And these are the levels that concern me the most as I look out at what's happening in these spheres. It's what I like to think of as a kind of purity spiraling. And Trent Horn has talked well about this. And it's this idea of we want to be ever more pure. We want to be ever more different. And the original title I had for this video, when it was going to be more of an essay, was in favor of a non-reactionary traditionalism. Because this is where I want to settle for a second. I am all for people seeking out traditional forms of Christianity and finding deep rootedness in the history of the church and pulling on vast wells of resources in the great traditions, right? These are all beautiful things. But what concerns me is that so often our traditionalism isn't rooted in finding goodness, truth, and beauty in something, but rather in trying to reject the ugliness of the world that we see around us. And I get it, right? There's a lot of weird things happening in the world right now that are cause for concern, and I think people want to find something that feels better than that. But what begins to be, at times, perhaps unhealthy, is when this takes on this like overriding sense of I need to reject everything about the world, and I am going to measure my own fidelity to the tradition, my own faithfulness to the gospel, by my hatred of everything else. And we can get into weird places here when we combine that with a purity spiraling of I have to one-up everyone, right? I have to be even more traditional, even deeper into the sources. I have to find this one thing, or I have to kind of take on these more and more stringent stances. And it leads to things like, it's sad, but go on the internet, you'll find this, people denying the Holocaust because they want to be so radical. They want to be so based, right? Trent Horn talked really well about this in a recent video. And then we get to things about like really weird stances towards women. We get like, not just that modern feminism is bad, right? But actually anything promoting women is bad. And actually women shouldn't vote, but we can't stop there. Actually, not only should women not vote, but no one should vote because we should have a monarchy. Wait, no, we shouldn't have a monarchy. We should have a theocracy. It's like, where are we getting to these things, people? This is deep down the iceberg. You'll see that we're actually below it. And then when you begin to question these things, you get the final layer of the iceberg. That is, the church fathers said mean things sometimes. They cursed, right? So let me call you vulgar names for not agreeing with all of the above. And at this point, I just want to tell people, like, let's take a breath, right? Like, let's come up for air here. I'm glad we're interested in these things, but let's get some perspective. Let's maybe sign off the internet for a moment. Let's get around some real people, and let's just say, okay, maybe some things in modernity are bad. Maybe our culture is heading in the wrong direction. Maybe we've made some mistakes. Maybe we've imbibed some ideas based on principles or notions that we actually think are faulty, and so we should come up with better ones. This is all great, and let's find good and true and beautiful things in the Christian tradition. But let's not just be reactionary for the sake of being reactionary. Let's not just try to see how we can one-up everyone and being more and more traditional to the point that we lose sight of why we're doing any of this and what we're actually for. It can be very dangerous when we only define ourselves by what we're against. It takes on a very hostile attitude, and the people that disagree with us aren't just wrong, but they're dangerous. And you don't reason with dangerous people often, right? You kill them. I mean, that's what happens in war, right? We go past the stage of reasoning and diplomacy and we go to the methods of war, which is ultimately ends in death. But we've done this with our ideologies as well. Rather than seeing people as people who disagree, people who have different ideas and who we can reason with, we see them as dangerous and we take on really combative attitudes. And we increasingly, it seems, see everyone as dangerous. And it's our job to take them all down and tear down each and every one of them. And it's like, guys, let's slow down, okay? And so really that's the message of this video. I know it's different than some of my normal ones, but it's something that is increasingly concerning to me. I think that in the midst of all of this, we can lose sight of the character of Jesus. We can lose sight of why are we interested in these things. It's not even about faith at the end of the day, it seems, for so many people. It's about winning a culture war. And we see this with various figures who convert to Christianity or who become spokespeople for Christianity but aren't even Christian and seem entirely motivated by some war against wokeness or against the left or against this or that cultural ideology. And they use Christianity as this like blunt weapon and this source of legitimacy for the war. But guys, like, we are first and foremost followers of Jesus, right? Like, isn't that why we're interested in traditional Christianity? Not to win a culture war, but to be more faithful to Christ? And if it's not that, then like, why are we doing this? Why don't we just call it what it is? You know, call it a culture war, call it a war against whatever ideology. But let's not call this just being traditionally Christian, right? To be traditionally Christian might put you at odds with a lot of things, and it might have you take countercultural ideas, and it might have you be passionate about things. Those are all good. But the primary objective shouldn't be beating down the left. The primary objective should be fidelity to Christ, of ever deeper intimacy with him. And I'm scared that we're in danger of just losing the plot here. And so hopefully in this language of the internet, its first language, that of memes, we can maybe, just maybe, get a little sense of, yes, let's remember why we're here. Let's focus on what really matters. And let's maybe avoid unhealthy extremes.